It looks like we are live. So welcome everyone. This is the Queer Breakfast Club, and we have a couple of awesome authors. So I believe, is it Aya is going to introduce them for us.
Thank you. Just a reminder to everyone beforehand, this is being recorded. So we ask all attendees, other than like our authors and volunteers, to keep their cameras and mics off. So with us today, we have Bruce Coville, Shaun, Hutchinson, and Ray Stoeve. Bruce is an author of young adult fiction and has written, I believe, over 100 books.
Mm-hmm.
His works feature books including The Unicorn Chronicles, My Teacher is an Alien, and The Thief of Worlds. Shaun is a young adult author of queer books including Brave Face, a memoir, At the Edge of the Universe, and Violent Ends. Finally, Ray is also a young adult author and wrote Between Perfect and Real, which was published this April. They also created the Young Adult and Middle Grade Trans and Non-Binary Voices Master List, which is a database that tracks books written by trans authors featuring trans characters. So we hope you all enjoy getting to know these authors more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I just want to encourage everyone that you can, or in the audience, submit questions in the chat so that we can, interact with these great authors. To introduce myself, my name is Marilyn, and I'm volunteering for the first time this year. Very excited. And I think while we're waiting for audience questions to come in, I will jump in with hopefully a sort of basic question. Feel free to answer in whatever order you want. So let's start with, what is the first book you remember reading where you really saw yourself?
Ooh.
I think the first queer book I ever read was Keeping You a Secret by Julianne Peters. And at that time, with the knowledge and language that I had for myself, it was the first time that I saw, someone who was also queer in fiction. And I think I was 15 when I read that book. Yeah.
There were no books at all where I could see myself when I was a kid. We were a secret people.
I wasn't a kid. I mean, I was probably like 19 or 20, but I read, it was Magic's Pawn by Mercedes Lackey. And it was kind of traumatizing because it was a traumatizing book, but also I misread part of it. And I thought that they were also having sex with the talking horses. And, and it was that was actually a misunderstanding that I carried with me until just like 2 years ago, where I was on a panel with someone and they were like, that never happened. And I was like, yeah, it did. And then I went back and I reread that part and I was like, oh, I really misunderstood that. So yeah, it was traumatizing in many ways.
That was actually just my favorite moment of the day, Shaun.
Yeah, not really the answers I was expecting on that one, but very good though. Right, so yeah, let's see. I have a couple questions here that I have, but I'm looking for more to come in. So let's go into a little bit into your writing. So are there characters in your books that reflect struggles that you've had that you'd like to talk about? So obviously nothing that makes you feel uncomfortable, but feel free to share.
Well, I'll start. And not really. I write mostly middle grade. The reason I'm part of this conversation is that The Skull of Truth, which was in 1997, was one of the very first books to have a gay character in it and not have it be about that or about trauma or about great Sturm und Drang. It's the setup is the skull compels absolute truth, and the main character accidentally is forced into bringing it to the family dinner one night, and all the family secrets come spilling out, including when Aunt Hilda says, Benny, when are you gonna settle down and get married? And he says, I have a boyfriend. If you guys would just get used to that and accept it, my life would be a lot easier. It freaks Charlie out, and it's about him coming to terms with his uncle's sexuality. That's the subplot of the book. But it was, one of the things, it was considered very daring at the time. People said, "Oh, you're so brave to write that." And I thought, it's what I wanted to write. I'm just too dumb to be brave. God. And there's a price to pay. It's expected. I lost school gigs over it, only from Christian schools, which says something about Christianity, I think. But it was the story I wanted to tell. And then I wrote a story for Marion Dane Bauer for an anthology called Am I Blue? It's named for the story Am I Blue, which I wrote. And that was the first book written, anthology really gathered for gay and lesbian positive stories for young adult readers. And it was a real groundbreaking book that Marion put together. But Am I Blue has had its own life as a story. And it's funny, I did an audio version of it, first as a standalone, then part of a collection of stories that we released, the same one. An audiophile reviewed it 10 years ago and very, very positively, the story. And then this time they said, well, it features stereotypes that are offensive. It's like the same story. And basically what it does have is a loving portrait of some of the funniest, bravest men that I've ever met. So that's sort of my, the foot on the ground I have to be here for this today.
It's interesting that you talk about like how like realistic portraits, years ago when you wrote that are now considered, stereotypes. And it's especially because it's one of the things that I had to overcome as a younger queer person was my dislike of stereotypes, and I went through a phase, where it was like, okay, I wanted to be, we called it straight acting back then, where I just wanted to be gay, but I didn't want anyone to know I was gay. And a lot of those stereotypes exist for a reason, and I had to come to terms with like the stereotypes, like Nathan Lane in The Birdcage. I found it very offensive when I first saw it. And now I look at it and I'm like, well, Nathan Lane is the heart of that movie. Nathan Lane is the reason that movie works.
Yes.
And if Nathan Lane hadn't been in that movie, I think the movie itself would have been horribly offensive, but Nathan Lane's heart makes that movie work. And so it's just really interesting. Sorry, I just was rambling about that because I the gatekeeping that we sort of do within our own community, is an interesting issue. And it's a lot of people like kind of think it's new now, but I remember like gay people have been gatekeeping other gay people, like when I was like 20 years ago when I was coming out, and, so anyway, identity is interesting. Sorry.
That was good.
I've had a lot of coffee.
I think I read Am I Blue around the same time as Keeping You a Secret, because I remember when I was trying to track down the like 10 books that there were, about queer characters when I was a teen, that was one of the ones that I found. So yeah, I remember that very well. I think I've forgotten because words are leaving my head, but the original question was including identity in our work, how we do it.
Yes.
Or like what sort of us is in our work.
Right. Do any of your characters reflect struggles you've had?
Yes. Yes. I'm trans, non-binary, queer, and like this book originally came out of, when I first started questioning my gender more than 10 years ago and wondering what it would have been like if I'd been able to play male roles in high school productions that I was in, and, what it would have been like if I'd had access to more like knowledge and language about gender and about transness. Between Perfect and Real is really the culmination of 10 years of figuring out my gender and then trying to put that into a book. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you all. So we have a follow-up question for Ray. The question is, did you have any say in who was cast as the narrator for Between Perfect and Real? They were so good, and I was really happy that the book was performed by someone who I believe is trans.
Yay. I'm so happy to hear that it was good. It's funny, like you get your own paper book and you read your book over and over, but you never like I need to listen to my own audiobook. Yes, I did have say, it was actually really wonderful. Recorded Books, who is the publisher of the audiobook, gave me veto power over the narrator, which is pretty rare, but they were really conscientious, and like, from the beginning, they said that they, would be hiring someone from that identity to read for Dean, to read the story. And so yes, I did have say, and it was great.
That's wonderful to hear. It's kind of the thing you don't think about, from the reader's perspective. I'm sad that you, the author, aren't reading your own book, but that's how it goes. So
I'm okay with not spending 8 hours in a studio trying to read my book aloud. It's really does a number on your voice, but that would have been fun too.
Not all authors can read their books. I mean, probably you can, but it's as an audiobook producer, I can tell you that some authors are very good at reading their material, and some shouldn't.
Yeah, no, because I did the audio for my memoir, and when I was done, they're like, "Oh, you should read your other books," and I was like, "No, like you wouldn't want that. Like it's easy because I know my voice and I know who all these people are, and I can do their voices. You don't want me trying to do other voice. No, just no."
I adore author-read memoirs. I mostly listen in the car, and if you spend 10, 15 hours with somebody telling you their life story in their own voice, you feel like they're your best friend. I was more, and it felt like if I happened to see him on the street in New York, I'd go, "Hey, Rob, how you doing?"
Yes. Yeah, I felt that way. I listened to the audiobook of George M. Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue. And by the end, I was like, I just want to like find George and like give them a hug, like, please, It was so well done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So on the topic of non-traditional, I don't know, this is a really bad transition, but so the question I was going to give you is, do you feel that young people today face more challenges, particularly with the pressure of social media, when exploring their identity? So it's kind of hard left turn here, but
I feel like we really have the span of on this.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more acceptance of the reality of varying sexuality. I'm bisexual. I'm the B in LGBTQ. And when I was 15, there was no name for that. I mean, I had to invent a word for myself, which was ambisextrous, which I thought was fairly clever. And for years, as a young man, there was a simple rejection of the very existence of a bi community. The message was always either, "Oh yes, you just haven't finished coming out, dear. You're not comfortable with it yet, but you will. You're gay, you just don't know yet." Or it's just a phase, and when it's over, you'll be back to being straight. After approximately, let me do a little math here, 58 years, I know it's not a phase. It's just...
Like, I don't know. I've seen a lot of, like, it's one of the reasons, like, because when I came out, I adopted this is, 20 some odd years ago, I adopted queer as the word that I use because I didn't feel like I fit into the gay community. And I've always kind of preferred that word. And I prefer it now because I feel like it gives people the ability to belong without having to define who they are and define things. And maybe they're not ready to. And I'm kind of glad that, like, on the one hand, I was talking about this earlier, is I understand why labels are important and why it's important to be visible and say words on the stage, like to say, like, I am gay or I am pansexual, or, like, labels are important for visibility, but also, like, not using labels, I feel like, is also kind of important because, like, I've seen, friends, like younger friends, authors that I've known, like, say, like, "Oh, I'm a lesbian," and then, like a couple years later go, "No, actually, I think I'm not," like, and then face sort of backlash online because of that, and so I think the struggles that young people have are maybe not necessarily more difficult, but the fact that they're dealing with them so publicly and openly, I feel like that adds a layer of complexity that I sure wouldn't want to have dealt with.
Yeah, and this goes back too, Shaun, to something you mentioned earlier, which was the community policing itself. And so I think there's a lot of judgment within the community, but are you doing gay right? Are you doing being a lesbian right? It's there's restrictions imposed within the community, which I think are harmful.
Yeah, totally. I initially came out as bi, and then later after high school gravitated to queer for a similar reason, Shaun. And that's why I use just non-binary as a term too, is I like having the broadest possible word that encompasses me and also gives me space to like move around in it. And I think that I super agree. It was hard enough being like coming out as bi, and then all the expectations that like went along with that, or like the stereotypes, you know, the it's just a phase, you know, or the like what you're talking about, Bruce, was still very much around, or like you're just doing it for attention, or you know, that kind of stuff. And then like the iterations of coming out that I've had since too, and then even with gender too, the way that my presentation and you know, internal experience has changed too, and people's reactions to that. It was enough in high school just to have my immediate like family and friends reacting to it. And then like when you're putting that out there online, I feel lucky that I'm in a place now where I feel very secure in who I am. What other people think of like how I change is like their business. I'm still gonna do me. But I can't imagine like the pressure for teens to be exploring publicly.
Right.
I do love queer as an umbrella term. There's a recently opened bar in Syracuse, Wunderbar, and they very specifically bill themselves as a queer bar, not as a gay bar, not as a lesbian bar, not as a bi bar, a queer bar. And it really basically she's like, it's anybody who just feels comfortable or feels like they're not white within the mainstream and is comfortable with, just come on in. It's for everybody. It's a wonderful place.
I love that. That sounds great.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, especially as sort of the whole the scene disappears. I mean, because like as much as I hated like gay bars when I was younger, like it was also like how you met other people, you know, and it created a sense of community, and it's one of the reasons why I like that we're able to write queer books now is we're able to sort of pass along the things that we used to only be able to pass like person to person, you know, like the culture and the history, and you know, and like now we can talk about those things in books, because I think a lot of that is getting lost. I don't know where that was going, but
I think you're right. Totally.
Well, it won't be long before somebody can do a really good study of the ability to present and the way different sexualities are presented in young adult materials, because it's been a rapid transformation once it started. And there are very, very clearly different stages of it. So.
Oh yeah, no,
Some graduate students can have a good time with that.
Well, I was talking about it like when I first wrote like the 5 Stages of Danger, Brawling, We're the Ants, like I was very sort of like, you know, I knew I didn't want to be, you know, the character's sexuality to be the main issue, but I wanted it to be like very clear, like this is a, you know, like a queer book, you know, and then when I was writing A Complicated Love Story Set in Space, I made it really clear, like every single living character is queer, but I'm not identifying any of them. None of them identify. And it's just when you find out, like, you know, we have one character named Jenny who just mentions in passing, like, or, you know, she just mentions like, oh, she hit on this one girl, and then, oh, later she had a boyfriend, and she never identifies, you know, and I like, so, I mean, that's just within like a few years, you know, and we're starting to see that. And, you know, we're starting to see books where it's like, you know, like it's a fantasy and there's no romance in it, but the characters are still queer because they're still queer, you know, and you know, we're seeing that transition now, like, and it's happening like right before our eyes, and it's weird and cool, and I like it a lot.
Yeah. There's actually a question related to that, which you've been talking about already, but the question is, as you have watched the queer genre develop, how do you feel the literature has affected the community or vice versa? So I'm just kind of putting that out there to see if we can attend to that as well. I know these are tough questions, right?
Yeah, like it creates a feedback loop, right? Because, you know, I'm always like really excited to read you know, especially from younger writers, younger queer writers, I'm excited to read how they're interpreting queer community these days, because it opens my eyes up, you know, to things, you know, because of course I come from a very limited perspective, you know, and so getting to see how, you know, the queer community is you know, is working is I don't know, it's really fantastic. I think it's a really great positive feedback loop. And I think a lot of the negative within, you know, the community is less like bad and is more just sort of like everybody trying to figure out where we belong, you know, and some of it goes bad, you know, like a lot of the bi erasure and policing, like I hate that. But I don't think it comes from a bad place. I think it comes from a place of misunderstanding and trying to figure them, you know, their own place out. And I think hopefully like education will bring us to a better place of understanding.
Yeah, I do feel like there's a snowball effect. And from my particular vantage point, tracking like trans YA by trans people, you know, this year, like I think 20 to 25 books are coming out, as opposed to, I don't know, 1 to 5 books in the past 10 years. And there's really been this explosion. And even still, there is a lot of pressure on books coming out to be like the representative story for that particular identity. And we still have
the story, yes.
Yeah, totally. And we still also have like, I'm really interested to see where things go, because although we have so many books coming out this year, many of them are written by white trans masc folks or white non-binary folks. And I would really love to see publishing start picking up like more stories from like trans women and trans femmes and Black trans people. And, you know, it is really exciting to feel like the wave is beginning, and then also feeling like, okay, where's it gonna go next? Where's like, I know that like this is like my first book, but I feel like I'm already looking to see like, who are the like writers who are just coming on Twitter, who are just starting to look for representation, who are just starting to take part in like pitch wars and other like Twitter kind of events, because that's how like I found representation. Because I feel like something that I love about queer community is the mentoring that happens. And I really want to sort of take my place in that pipeline, I guess.
It's got to be harder for you now though, because like when 5 Stages came out, like I could count on like 2 hands the number of queer books that were coming out a year. And so like every time like a queer book sold, I could be like, oh, let me like, you know, like follow that person on Twitter and just like DM and be like, hey, what's going on? And now it is like, I can't keep track. I could read every single book that came out. And now I can't even. And it's like, whoa.
Totally. I am already falling behind.
And I'm, you know, at a different stage in life, so I'm not really part of that young, vibrant queer community now. It's just not where I am in life, so I can't really comment on that too much. I feel like I've made my contributions.
That's understandable. Let me follow up with a question, not particularly for Ray, but you were talking about this a little bit. So do you have any advice for young writers who want to represent the LGBTQ characters in their stories, but don't actually fall in that category? I know that's somewhat of a hot topic, I think.
Mm-hmm. Should I kick that one off? Since I was somewhat I think for my part, when I'm thinking about writing characters that I really don't share a major life experience with, I am never going to write them as a main character, and I'm never going to try and write about what it's like to be that identity. And I think in terms of like just thinking specifically about trans characters, it's an interesting thing to think about, because I think that there are writers who are not trans who have written trans main characters that I love and that I think are very well written and representative. And I think that that can come from a number of places. Sometimes the author themselves is trans and just, you know, isn't out or hasn't figured it out yet. And sometimes it's because they're surrounded by trans people in their daily life. And so they don't have this, like, they have had a lot of time to unpack, you know, their ideas about gender and what it means to be trans. And so I don't know if that is anything concrete, but that's what I've got for now.
Yeah. That's a very good answer. I know that's very difficult, you know, to come from, to try to, I know writing's about your experiences and you don't have that experience. It's very difficult and can kind of be insensitive if you're trying to approximate someone else's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Did either Bruce or Shaun want to add anything onto that?
Is this like, you know, one of the things I've been like thinking about over the last couple of years is, you know, I am a full believer in, you know, everyone can write anyone, and, you know, and because like we're writers, right? But then at the same time, you know, you don't have the experiences to write certain things. And so like when people ask me, they're like, can I write gay characters? I'm like, sure, you can write gay characters. Like, you know, that's fine. Like, I can't stop you. But like, whose story are you writing? Like, are they just a gay character, like who is also, you know, like a fighter pilot? I don't know, you know, like, or are you writing a coming out story? Are you writing somebody else's specific like experience? And I would veer people away from the second part. But then like, there's another question, and it's a question that I have taken some steps on in my own life over the past couple of years, which is deciding like, if we're writing other people's experiences, are we pushing those people out of their ability to write them? And it's not something that I was particularly thoughtful of for a while. And so now, like, you know, I've made the decision, like, I am only going to be writing very specific characters for a while until there is parity within like publishing, until, you know, authors who want to tell their story have as many seats at the table. And that's just a personal decision. And I don't think that, you know, everyone has to do that, but I don't know, I think it's the right one for me. And I think everyone just has to be, you know, like, should be thinking about it, because I know I didn't, and I wish that I had sooner.
Yeah, it's a hard line, I feel like, because you want to read more of these stories, but you don't want to be insincere about it. And I think having your own experiences really helps with that. Kind of going back to our first question, you know, where do you see yourself? If there were no books where you saw yourself, then that's, you know, obviously a space that needed to be filled.
Right.
And it's not like they're not all like, you know, I always look back at Becky Albertalli, you know, who, and I met Becky right when Simon versus Homo sapiens Agenda came out. Like, Becky Albertalli wrote a really good book and has done a really good job within the community. Like, I went to an event where she was at, and it was before Simon became popular at all. And I remember someone asked a question about writing gay characters, and she was holding the mic, and she literally just passed the mic, you know, and she just said, I'm not the best person to talk about this. And so I feel like if you are going to write outside of your experience, be Becky, you know, because she has always made sure to, you know, to put other people's, you know, voices above her own, people from within the community. And I like, you can't blame her for the book's success. She wrote a good book. People responded to it, and not just non-queer people, but queer people responded to it. So,
and she has, you know, since come out, which she shouldn't have had to either. So that's another question.
That's a whole different panel.
We don't need to discuss Becky's personal life here.
That's a whole other panel. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I am going to be free about this, admitting this. So I'm sort of running out of questions. The last one on my list was, how has writing authentic stories for LGBTQ teens evolved over the past 10 plus years, which we have sort of mentioned. We could definitely go back to it if you want. I don't know. Is there anything else you guys wanted to say about that one? Or I'm just going to start, you know, asking questions. Maybe good, maybe bad.
Yeah, we should get some questions from the audience too. I don't see people asking questions. They open up, people. Come on.
If I was them, I would have loved this. Like, come on here.
I also have a question specifically for Bruce, if he feels like being put on the spot.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, when I texted my sister, because we both, we listened to your, audiobooks and read your books as kids. And I was like, I want a panel with Bruce Coville. And I actually didn't know that you were bi before being on this panel. And it was really cool to be like, oh, this author that I grew up reading has been bi this whole time. Like, awesome. And she said to me, she was like, I wonder if, we read all these books of yours, like, the Magic Shop series and the Alien, like all these books about, kids who are like having something weird happen to them or like different in some way. She was like, I wonder if that was like his way of like writing about bisexuality.
Oh, that's an interesting question, and probably more deeply than I've ever thought about it. I was just trying to write cool adventure stories with weird characters. Well, and actually, I should amend that a little bit. In the Aliens Ate My Homework series, it is very specific, and it also happens in my Teachers in Alien series. There are characters from other planets who break down the idea of gender duality and say, no, it takes 5 people to get a baby on our world, or we don't have a word for that. I mean, how do people get on with only 2 characters, 2 genders? And I've had a lot of, and that went right by a lot of people, just, in a funny alien quirk, but I've had a lot of people write to me and say, that was the first time I ever thought about that there can be something that's non-binary, that there can be something else. So, frankly, I was being subversive. Just, I think that, if you're writing honestly for children, if teachers and writers for young readers are teachers, de facto, whether you want to be or not, you're a teacher. And teachers have, in public school, have 2 mutually exclusive jobs. They are to teach kids to think and to maintain the status quo. And you cannot do both. If you teach kids to think, you're attacking the status quo, because the status quo kind of sucks. So, yeah, I kept putting things out there, but that's because I just liked opening up questions.
Putting the little seed out there.
Yeah. I actually, this is a less known story, but I did a story in the late 1990s for an anthology called Dirty Laundry that is the first story that I know of that's trans friendly. It's called The Secret of Life According to Aunt Gladys. And it's probably dated now because there wasn't a lot of awareness of the trans community. And certainly I wasn't writing as a trans person, but that was the secret in this particular family, was that the boy's uncle was about to undergo transitional surgery. And it's another place where I have a marker that I feel good about having done that. So, I love children's literature ways as a way to poke at the edges of what's acceptable.
Yeah. Thank you for hearing.
I was gonna say, I love that. I love that, how you put that. Like, I enjoy that. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's it. I love that.
What are the things that we can talk about? Like, what are
we did get, oh, okay, someone said me. I was gonna say we did get one more question in during that. They said, what are your favorite queer representations in movies and TV? So they're kind of branching out here.
Well, right now I'm catching up on, I don't watch that much TV, and I don't know why I didn't watch this 10 years ago, because I'm such a musical theater freak, but I'm watching Smash, which is inside story on making a Broadway show. And Christian Borle's character, he's so adorable anyways, but his totally accepting of himself and the acceptance within the Broadway community of a queer community is it's a very comfortable place to be. It's not about outing people. It's not about dealing with them. It's just, oh yeah, we're in Broadway with the chorus is mostly gay. That's just the way it works.
I was gonna say, like, I think right now, I have 2, and one of them is going to come out really weird. But the first one is Star Trek Discovery. It's and I'm terrible with names, but you've got Doctor and one of the chief scientists are a married gay couple. And I love them, not just because they're both portrayed by gay actors, but because Star Trek to me, like growing up, like that was my thing. And they always sort of like tiptoed around, you know, sexuality and gender. And this time it was like, they just went for it. And so, you know, they have brought in, and they've committed to it. So they've brought in transgender actors and actresses to play transgender and non-binary characters. They're finally like giving us the queer characters like Star Trek has always deserved. And I'm very happy about that. The other one is, and this one is really weird, is I started watching Gotham for some reason, and it's absolutely insane. And Penguin is queer, and he's a terrible character, but for some reason I love him because he's like, you know, he's in love with the Riddler, and the Riddler doesn't love him back, and he's just like murdering everybody and like trying to kill him. And I'm like, this is totally like gay life. Like I know some gays who would be like, if you don't love me, I'm gonna murder your whole family. And I was like, oh, this is so perfect. And then I found out from someone that the actor who portrays Penguin is also gay. And so I was like, that makes total sense because he knows how to play this. It's so campy. And I'm just, I mean, he's like I said, he's a terrible character, but I feel so blessed that we get a terrible, campy, queer character who's not coded queer, but who is actually queer. And like, that makes me so happy.
The queerness isn't like the reason that they're villainous or creepy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like we get to be villains, but like, you know, not because we're queer. So yeah, it's really cool.
I think two of my favorite recent representations have been Everything Sucks, which is a Netflix original about teens in rural Oregon in the mid-90s. And the queer storyline is just so nostalgic. I'm a very nostalgic person in general, but like it feels so real, and it's so awkward, and like she's figuring out like, oh my God, I like girls, and they go to a Tori Amos concert. It's just like and she like sees a lesbian couple and she's like, oh my God. You know, it's like so relatable. And then Work in Progress, which is Showtime, I believe. And it's created by a lesbian comedian from, I think they're in the Midwest. And the character, and I think the comic also has OCD, and it's about, and she's like in her, I think 40s, and she meets this young trans guy who's 23, I believe, and they strike up a very unlikely romantic relationship. But it's also it's like darkly funny, very accurate about like OCD, you know, a certain kind of OCD representation. And because it's made by queer and trans people, like there's like beautiful generational moments, and then there's generational moments where you're like, oh no, like they're very realistic to like what it's like being in the queer community. And it's just like so well done. So those are two of my favorites.
I want to throw out Pose too.
Yeah.
Like, Pose is one.
Like I'm obsessed, like, you know, because it's queer people in front of the camera, behind the camera, in the writer's room, everywhere. And I am just like obsessed. And I'm so sad that more people are not watching that show. Mm-hmm. But I'm also feel like, because then we got Legendary because of Pose on HBO, which is if you haven't seen that, it's amazing. Like it's a ballroom scene competition that is judged by people from the ballroom scene. It's like, it's amazing. It's the whole thing. Anyway, sorry.
The other recent one that I've loved is Schitt's Creek. And it's just one of the best romances ever. And what's so wonderful about it is that nobody in town minds. It is such there's a real beauty in that show, in that the guys, David and his partner, getting together, and everybody's happy for them. It's at no point is they're getting together an issue of any kind.
Well, you know, that was intentional.
Yeah.
I'm terrible with names, but David, the actor, said like, we're not doing homophobia, period. Like we're just not doing it. And it was like, okay. And yeah, so that was like super intentional. And I love that, you know, that it's just, you know, they decided to avoid using queer pain as a storyline.
Yeah. But that's what made it so wonderful. It's just, I adored it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is our 5-minute or 4-minute now warning.
Oh,
and I do have one final question. So I feel like this is a good one to end on as well. So this person said, how do you feel about the fact that your books are helping young members of the LGBTQ+ community find themselves?
I feel good.
Right? Like,
I feel great, and I only hope that my word is never taken as God. Like I think that I feel very committed to representing the nuance in any queer character's life that I write, and that is hopefully the takeaway, and not that there's one way to be X, Y, or Z.
I take great pride in Am I Blue? I think it's probably done more good in the world than any other story that I've done. 100 novels, 40 stories. I think it's the one that may have done the most good in the world. Because when it came out, there was such a desert in terms for young people looking for that kind of stories. And 25 years later, I'd still run into people who would, well, occasionally somebody just walk up and say, you wrote that, and burst into tears. And was told more than once, this story saved my life. So yeah, how do you not feel good about that? It's just.
But I mean, like at the same time, like I think about like Brave Face is really interesting because, you know, I get emails from young people and from older people, and, you know, I hear stories from librarians and all those. But the thing that I hope for most with Brave Face is that it becomes irrelevant. Like I want it to become irrelevant. I want it to just be a time capsule of a weird kid with depression in the 90s. Like, but I don't want kids to need it anymore. You know, like that's my hope. And if we get there, that'll be like the best thing in the world. Like if in like 5 or 10 years, I get a call from my editor or from my publisher, and they're just like, we're putting this book out of print, I will be like, yes, like that'll make me happy, you know, which is a really weird thing to say. And they would probably kill me for saying that.
It's a very funny thing about writing social criticism, which is that you want it to become irrelevant, but you want it to live forever. I mean,
yeah. Also, it's really weird having certain things about me out there now. Like when I wrote that, I was like, Mom, you can't ever read that. And then when it came out, she was like, oh, I totally read it. And I was like, oh, no.
Did you really think she wouldn't?
Well, I mean, I kind of hoped. Like she hasn't read all my other books, but it's just like, you know, like she's like, well, what? She's like, I just wanted to know things. I was like, did you need to know that I lost my virginity in the backseat of a Mustang at the airport? Like, did you need to know that? And she's like, no, I didn't need to know that. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Okay. I can tell you because, you know, as a parent, the best way to get a kid to read a book is say, you can't read, hide it. That's, yeah. It's still like, you basically put a big red circle on that book and said, Mom, read this.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
That's great. It's good to know that there's an element of realism back there. You know, your parents are still going to be on your case, you know, despite the fact that you've sold all these books. And yeah.
Oh yeah, that never changes ever. I like, even now, like my mom, every single book she'll be like, is that Mother Me? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I've got like 13 books. Yes.
Did that too. The mom in Between Perfect and Real is like kind of low-key. She's growing, but she's kind of transphobic and homophobic. And my mom was so anxious that it was her. And I was like, Mom, all the times that I've told you how much I love you and that you're the best mother that anyone could ever have, and that I hope other kids have moms like you, why would you think this is you? It's fiction. I'm in the book, but you're not in the book.
Seriously. I think all moms of authors probably secretly think every mother is them.
Yeah.
Totally. My dad hasn't asked me that. I really think it's a thing.
Luckily, my dad doesn't read any of those. Like my dad still tells random people that I won the Newbery Award. And I'm like, Dad, that you can't tell people that. Like, it's not true. I was like, I don't even write for that age group. It's weird. Yeah. So.
Well, that's fantastic. It is our end of end of time. Words are not happening anymore. I think I'm just so
time doesn't exist.
You know, end of the day kind of deal. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that you all felt you know, willing to come, and you guys had such great, you know, attitudes, and you felt willing to share, which, you know, in this kind of forum is really, really important. So thank you guys so much. Thank you everybody who listened and gave questions. You're all awesome. And yeah, I think I'm supposed to plug merchandise that you can still buy. So go buy merchandise. And everybody have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you. And thank you, Ray and Bruce. It was such a great opportunity to talk to you all. Thank you.
The only problem is we can't go out and have a beer now, which I would really love to do.
Well, if you're ever in Seattle, there are 2 of us here. So
I will keep that in mind, guys. Thank you. It's great to
have a great day.